Hello my fellow strawmen and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. Today's video is inspired by one of my commenters, so shout out to Nathan Stafford. I had never heard of Messenger of Truth until this comment, but when I looked up his channel I found something that I could watch for hours. I have a strange sense of humor and I find it absolutely hilarious when someone argues against a misunderstanding of my position. That makes this man comedy gold in my eyes. This video I'll be addressing his top 5 arguments against atheism. Roll the clip.
Now, right off the bat, I just have to point out that I'm not like a lot of other Christian content creators out there. Instead of trying to use science to prove Christianity or the Bible to be true, I actually go the other way around. I use Christianity, I use the Bible to prove anything at all.
I have reasons for which I think science to be an accurate method, which is why I would accept scientific standards to determine the truth of various scriptures. I'm not going to dig into those reasons right now, because the point I want to make is that if Messenger here has good reasons to believe the Bible to be divinely sourced, then he too could have a valid line of reasoning. I've never been able to find a good reason of my own to believe in its divine inspiration, nor have I ever been given one I could recognize, but maybe Messenger will change that.
I believe Romans 1 is part of the Word of God, okay? Therefore, I believe that God has already made himself evident to them.
When? How? What evidence am I looking for exactly?
God himself has proved his own existence and his divine nature and eternal power to everyone. Everybody knows something of God's divine nature and eternal power, and they are understood so that they are without excuse.
I hate to burst this guy's bubble, but my personal experience is in blatant contradiction to this. I know Messenger can't accept this because it's only the personal testimony of my own experience, but I really don't understand God's power and nature. I mean, I can conceive of the concept of them, but I don't understand how they could possibly be the true nature of reality. I'd like him to give me a good reason to believe in the Bible. For the sake of an honest conversation, I am trying to be open about the possibility. But I don't actually think that's what's going on here. I think that this passage is a clear example of the mental block that Messenger has. He cannot conceive that he is wrong about the nature of the Bible. It's a dishonest position, but nonetheless, he is literally incapable of thinking about the possibility that God didn't provide us a message, and he is convinced the Bible is that message. He'll never admit it, but he is a presuppositionalist. He has presupposed that the Bible is the Word of God, which includes another presupposition that God exists.
If you want to say that there's some atheist out there who doesn't know that God exists, then you're saying that God is a liar and that he's bad at communicating.
See, this is the kind of stuff I fall in my chair from laughing so hard. I'm not saying there's some atheists out there. I'm right here. And not only am I completely unaware of God's existence, I think he doesn't exist, period. That means that I'm not claiming God to be a liar or a poor communicator. I'm saying that he doesn't exist. The men who wrote the Bible weren't even necessarily lying. I think that the majority of them were honestly mistaken and heavily influenced by the culture around them. I'll agree that those men were bad at communicating, but I'll make no such claims about God.
Now let's get to the top 5 scientific proofs. Starting off at number 5 is our observation and experimentation of genetics. Basically, genes contain the information, the instructions for the cells in your body to create certain things. The information within the DNA tells the cells how to act.
This is true. I would even go so far as to say that there is a language-ish thing going on in the form of the transcription process, a language formed by the tRNA which matches certain codon triplets to particular amino acids. It's all very precise and complex and couldn't possibly have popped into existence fully formed.
We know that genes contain information, and what do we observe about information in every other area of life? Well, it goes back to a mind.
This is utterly false. In cases where the information does not self-reproduce nor experience selective pressures, then I would agree that any information which specifies some kind of complex functionality came from a mind. Whether it's the blueprints containing information on how to build a comfortable house, or the colors on a canvas conveying how the artist felt that day, I would be happy to conclude that these things came from a mind, even if I've never met them. It's different when the information carries within it instructions to copy itself. Then the information could have been created by its parent, which could have been created by its parent, and so on. If the copying process is imperfect, there could even be differences between the copies. If there were only a single self-copying system, which made only a single copy before it broke apart, then you would expect errors to accumulate over time, and eventually the system would break. But if there were something which copied itself without falling apart, so that it could go on to make more copies, then something interesting happens. Most of the copies would have harmful mutations and fall apart, but some might have helpful mutations, which means that these descendants would make even more copies. This is natural selection, and it allows successive generations to accumulate useful information. Thus, when we see a large amount of information built around a core of something which reproduces, it does not necessarily have to come from a mind.
Now, there's obviously tons of AI out there that copy and send information, but they aren't the origin of information. You have to program these things to mimic human speech and behavior.
This is a great example of one of the nuances of my point. I think that if a system containing specified information cannot reproduce, then that's a good indicator of design. If it can reproduce, it's inconclusive. There are still questions of irreducible complexity and end purpose, either of which could rule out the natural selection mechanism. In the case of AI, I think it can be shown that there was an end purpose in mind. The only things which could apply selective pressures to evolve an AI towards human communication are, well, humans. So while the selection process is very analogous to natural selection, it must be artificial. This is different than, say, parrots, because parrots have evolved a more general mimicry mechanism that isn't directed at humans. It could easily be helpful for survival. It could be used to trick other organisms into giving up food, for example. It is a trait which is useful to the organism in the moment, so there need not be an end goal. Thus, evolution may not be capable of fully accounting for AI, but it could be for parrots and other living organisms.
If there is a piece of information out there, its source is a rational mind.
What Messenger is trying to do is an argument from analogy, and a very convincing one on the surface. Most things we see with information, and especially the non-living things, were created by a mind. Therefore, living things were too. But since the only minds we know of, our own, could not be responsible for our own design, it must be God's mind. At least that's the idea. But as I've stated, the fact that living organisms reproduce within populations means that it could either be a designer or evolution following abiogenesis. All of the necessary components for abiogenesis were present in the early Earth. There were unfathomable numbers of organic molecules going through chemical reactions, driven cyclically by the energy from the sun. But a mind, while a valid explanation, begs the same question it claims to solve. A mind, too, carries functionally useful information, and so cannot be uncaused. Saying that a mind caused life just makes the question harder, but saying it came from evolution actually solves the issue of origin.
Does it really make any sense for me to look at this Greek textbook and suppose that it came about through random chance, the ink came to the paper and just formed this Greek textbook?
Of course not. Textbooks don't reproduce. Find a better analogy.
Now, atheists have their responses to this, as well as the next three, and this isn't the greatest proof, because the atheist can always pull out what we would call an atheist of the gaps argument. Oh, science will figure this out someday.
I'm happy to say this is not my response. I'm not saying that science will definitively figure out every detail in the future. I'm saying that the explanation of evolution is plausible, and I know of no other plausible explanations.
And say, oh, science will figure that out sometime. We have a bunch of other theories that can account for this. And obviously by theories, they mean stories that could account for this, stuff that they just make up.
Stuff which is, importantly, falsifiable. Messenger can't say that for his beliefs. If he's wrong about his beliefs, he has absolutely no way of telling, and yet he refuses to conceive of the possibility of being wrong. I could easily be wrong, and if I am, there are literally hundreds of ways to demonstrate it to me. Show me a crocoduck. Show me a mammal fossil from the Cambrian. Show me a population of wild koalas living in Scotland. Any of these things and more would stop me from believing in evolution. If you just want stories that make you feel comfy, be a Christian.
I have a video from a few months ago where I explain why evolution, literally on its own terms, cannot be called a theory, because it is impossible to test and observe and prove scientifically.
Proof is never part of the claim. That's a math thing. I'm just looking for the best explanation. Evolution makes specific falsifiable predictions which can be tested. I already gave a few, but the best pieces of evidence I know about are the nested genetic relations between organisms and the geographical distributions of families. Now, frankly, biology isn't my specialty, and there are better people you can ask if you want more detailed answers. But I'll at least give the example that amniotes are distinguished from the other tetrapods not just by the amnion protecting the embryo, but also by a different breathing mechanism in the form of expanding the rib cage rather than the throat, the complete loss of gills, and other details that involve the kidneys which I don't fully understand. Within each clade there are more clades. Birds, lizards, and mammals are all amniotes. Salamanders and frogs are not. Because these subgroups must have split off long after the amniote split, they could not share sets of features. You will never find a creature with the wing of a bird and the skin of a frog. Everything you find with bird wings will have amniote characteristics, and everything you find with frog skin will have amphibian characteristics. These are observational, falsifiable predictions of evolution, and they match reality. On the other hand, I've never met a Christian who knew of a way they could either test or observe God, let alone prove him. More often I hear the excuse of Matthew 4:7 because they know God is impossible to test or observe.
Even if the story of evolution is true, that we used to be fish.
This may just be imprecise wording, but Messenger isn't helping convince me that he understands evolution. I have only ever been a human, but humans are a type of ape, and apes are a type of mammal, and mammals are a type of tetrapod, and tetrapods are, in fact, a type of fish. We didn't used to be fish. We are, cladistically speaking, still fish.
On to number 4. For this one, I'm going to take some help from Charles Darwin himself. This is what he said. To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Yes, I agree. Seems absurd because it is absurd.
Messenger's second proof comes in the form of a quote line. I would like to point out from the section of the quote that he cut the word seems. Seems means that something may appear one way on the surface, but actually be another. If you actually read the full quote, you can see that Darwin thinks evolution is absurd the same way it was thought to be absurd when heliocentrism was first proposed, against the common sense of the people, and yet correct. In the end, if it can be shown that there are successive iterations that gradually build up functionality, then it wouldn't undermine evolution. Turns out we do have this pathway, but that isn't even the important part. Even if we didn't know what the pathway was, no irreducible complexity advocate I know of has ever demonstrated that the pathway could not exist, and so evolution still wouldn't be falsified. All they ever have is assertions of absurdity, but this is only evidence of their small-minded thinking.
Here's a diagram of the eye. Pupil, iris, lens, retina, the optic nerves. You have all these different parts, and what the evolutionists literally cannot even begin to explain is which one of these possibly evolved first.
The retina. If you want to be specific, the photoreceptors in the retinal cells evolved first. Even if it were only capable of detecting light, that would have been evolutionarily beneficial compared to the other organisms at the time, which had no light perception whatsoever.
Like, the eye cannot work with one of these missing.
The eye could easily work with, say, the lens missing. Things just might be a bit blurry. But again, there would have been a time in the past when the other individuals in the population would have had only photosensitive dimples, and so a pinhole eye would have been useful, even without a lens.
Well, let's just say that creature starts evolving the optic nerve first, or the retina. In what world is it biologically advantageous to have part of an eye rather than the whole eye?
Let's go back to that Darwin quote, because even back then they knew that there were primitive nerveless organisms which were light sensitive. They're easy enough to look up. Just search for light-sensitive organisms with no nerves. See, even without an optic nerve returning to a central nervous system, having photoreceptors still allows for the existing metabolic and chemical signaling pathways to be interfered with. And it is the influence of these that would have caused an organism to have some reaction to light, something on which natural selection could act. The photoreceptors came first. Messenger then spends a few minutes pointing out another example of irreducible complexity in the form of massive sauropod dinosaurs, culminating in this question.
How does it come about that you have an animal 6 tons, then over a few million years, 7 tons, 8 tons, 9 tons, 10 tons, 11 tons, 20 tons, 30 tons, 40 tons, 50 tons? Oh, still not quite fit. There's some more adaptation that it still needs to go through. It's more advantageous to become 60 tons, and then 70, and then 80, and 90. Like, why?
If you're listening to this and think Messenger just made a good point, I want you to go look up the concept of an evolutionary arms race. Whether it's surviving predation from another species or outcompeting the members of one's own species, there are cases when a selective pressure can act in the same direction over long periods of time. I don't know which exact mechanism would have acted on the sauropods, but there is nothing irreducibly complex about large size. It may in fact be the most obviously reducible thing. So if you can't get your mind around this one, I don't think you're going to get the eye thing.
In the book of Job, God pointed to the behemoth and said, hey, can you subdue this creature? I believe the description of that creature fits a sauropod.
If I ask any 10-year-old to describe a sauropod, most of them will mention the really long neck. It's kind of the identifying feature. On the other hand, if you ask them to describe an elephant, they'll almost certainly mention its nose. Want to know which one Job mentions?
Now, moving on to number 3, you can actually see this one with a good pair of binoculars or a telescope. The planet Saturn in our solar system. This is from Wikipedia, but its ring system. Saturn has the most extensive and complex ring system of any planet in the solar system. The rings consist of particles in orbit around the planet made almost entirely of water, ice. And they say that our solar system is about 4.5 billion years old. And so Saturn's out there with this ring system made mostly of ice. And there's this thing in our solar system called the sun, and it's constantly giving off UV light radiation. So essentially it's estimated that the ring system of Saturn can only last up to 100 million years or so. And yeah, sure, that's a long time, but still way less than 4.5 billion years. And again, the stuff that I'm telling you here, it's not debatable. It's just how we're interpreting the facts and the evidence that we see in the observable universe. So basically, 4.5 billion years, why is there still this super bright, icy, and reflective ring system that Saturn has?
The solar system did not form all at once. Messenger has this habit of mixing up worldviews, where he thinks that atheists believe the same things he does. He thinks that astronomers are saying that Saturn had rings since the dawn of the solar system because he thinks the solar system all formed in one day. No, the rings just formed tens or hundreds of millions of years ago. They haven't been there for the majority of Saturn's existence. What probably happened was that long after the solar system had formed, some large comet got caught in Saturn's gravity, eventually ripped apart through tidal forces, and spread out into rings, which will, I fully agree, eventually disappear. Once again, Messenger thinks he's made a good point, but the truth is, it isn't even a relevant one. Saturn's rings are unrelated to the age of Saturn, the solar system, and the universe.
Saturn is telling the glory of God, not the glory of random chance universe popping into existence for literally no reason at all.
I believe that the universe did not pop into existence whatsoever. I don't think Messenger has ever even considered the other options. Like, for example, that the universe has always existed in some form or another, and that the Big Bang is only a transition, not a moment of creation from nothingness.
If you want to learn a bit more about the solar system, then check out this video from Jason Lyle.
Oh, I will. He's on my list, don't you worry.
Now, moving on to number 2, sticking with the solar system, comets. The existence of comets, atheists cannot explain coherently, that is. Comets are icy, dusty, and rocky bodies that orbit the sun, often exhibiting a bright glowing tail as they approach the sun due to the vaporization of ice and dust, and are considered remnants from the early solar system. And basically, it's a similar issue with the comets, this icy material orbiting close to the sun. How long is that going to last? Well, not billions of years is the answer. And again, this isn't something that's debatable. Atheistic scientists will agree with this analysis. They're not going to last longer than 100,000 years or so. With the technology we have today, we've been able to measure the size of comets. And as they orbit the sun, they lose some mass. And of course, if it goes around again and again and again, it's going to cease to be.
Fair point. I'll agree that no comets we see today were in their current orbit millions of years ago. But the entire point being made is based on a two-body system. A stable orbit in which the comet goes around the sun again and again, never changing. But the real solar system is not a two-body system. There are other things than just the sun and the comet to consider. There's Jupiter and the other gas giants. There are other stars in our galaxy, which over millions of years pass near to ours. Comets are generally objects which were left over from the formation of the solar system, which orbited too fast to fall to warmer orbits, but too slow to escape its gravity. There they stayed for billions of years, out beyond the orbit of Pluto, where it was cold enough that they didn't evaporate and lose all their mass. At some point in the last few thousand years, any comet we see now was knocked out of its orbit by a passing star or planet and fell toward the sun. At the end of the day, it's the same mistake as the Saturn proof. Messenger doesn't understand that the solar system is not some eternally static thing. Only two-body systems have that kind of stability, while three or more body systems are famously unstable and chaotic. Our solar system is not a two-body system, and so orbits can be changed. It hasn't been the same comets for the last 4.5 billion years, and so once again, this point isn't even relevant to the age of the solar system.
Now again, with this proof, along with all the other ones, they're always going to come up with some sort of answer. Oh, there must be some sort of mechanism out there in the universe that we can't prove nor disprove. We haven't observed anything like this. There must be comets just coming from somewhere, being generated out there in the universe. It's always this, again, it's atheism of the gaps.
Messenger has made this point a few times, and I've cut most of them out, but I need to address it at least once. What he is mistaking as atheism of the gaps is actually just called honesty. I don't know about any of you, but I was born a dumb, stupid human who knew nothing at all about the world. I'm proud to say that I've learned some things, but it's far, far from knowing everything. There are many things I would point to as plausible explanations, even though I don't know for sure. What Messenger is frustrated by is that instead of saying it could be true or it might not, he just wants to jump to it definitely isn't true. Comets changing their orbit? No way. Saturn's rings forming separate from the planet? Not possible. In his mind, he already knows everything about reality because the Bible told him that it was right. Seriously, this is all stemming from the fact that he starts with the Bible. He admits it himself.
I use Christianity, I use the Bible to prove anything at all.
And yet, the only argument he has given for why we should believe the Bible is telling me that Romans tells me that I already know God to exist. This man thought a little about atheism, got scared, decided that he spoke for all atheists and that they must be wrong, decided the Bible was true, and that he couldn't be wrong about the Bible being true because the Bible says that he knows it's true. I got news for you, buddy. The honest starting point for any and all proposals is that you don't know, and you should look for evidence pointing for or against it before making a decision. I'm not just going to jump to the conclusion that the Bible is true, and unless I'm giving a good reason, I'll never agree that what the Bible says must be true. So with that, let's hear Messenger's number one reason why atheism cannot be true.
Now, the number one scientific proof against atheism is the existence of science itself. Science disproves atheism. The concept of science itself disproves atheism. You see, science depends on this thing we call the uniformity of nature. That is, nature, that is the world that we live in, is uniform. That is the same.
Gee, I wonder what causes that uniformity. Do you think that nature itself could possibly account for such a property? Could it be an intrinsic property of reality that it is consistent? Or is it impossible for nature to account for its own uniformity, such that it must be upheld by some supernatural entity? I don't know. That's the honest starting point. I don't know whether nature upholds itself or is upheld by some other thing. Frankly, I don't have any way of investigating the metaphysics, so I don't know how I could even come to know this. But Messenger thinks he knows. He thinks that he can just assume that nature can't account for itself and that it must be upheld by something else. And since he's going to work this into his question, it won't be an honest one. Go on, Messenger, ask your bullshit.
An example of this is gravity, the warping of space and time, not necessarily a force, but that's irrelevant. All we have to do as Christians to point out the atheists' inconsistencies is ask them why they don't think that gravity is all of a sudden going to stop working. You know, because according to them, we live in a chance universe, random universe. There is no creator who is upholding the world by his very power and consistent nature.
So first, addressing the dishonest bias of his question, he says that I claim the universe to be of chancy random nature. I do not. I think there are random elements, especially on the quantum scale, and there are things which we don't know the details of and so appear random to us. But I do not think the universe is random. The universe follows rules. Statistics dictates that even if there is randomness on the smallest scale, order and patterns do emerge thanks to the law of large numbers. The universe, at least on the scale of humans, just isn't random. And second, Messenger assumes in his phrasing that a creator is necessary to explain the uniformity of nature. But why? This is what I was talking about earlier when I said that I don't know the metaphysics that would let me rule out the possibility of nature just being consistent. If Messenger knows of a good reason why a godless universe couldn't possibly be consistent, he didn't bother to share it with us. All he did was presuppose that a creator is necessary to uphold the uniformity of nature. Overall, this question was incredibly biased in its wording. But to answer it anyway, I don't know why gravity is consistent, nor do I know how to prove that it will always be that way. That isn't my claim. I only claim that things will probably be as they always have, because we literally have no evidence that nature changes.
The attempted answer that every atheist is going to try to give you is that, oh, in the past, I haven't started floating up, and so it's reasonable to conclude that in the future, I'm not going to start randomly floating into the sky as well. Now, this right here is textbook circular argumentation, and that's fallacious.
Circular argumentation is when the premises of an argument depend on its conclusion. If you can draw a circle out of the premises pointing to the conclusion, but the premises being justified by the conclusion, then it's a circular argument. So let me clarify what my argument on this position would be, and then I'll explicitly demonstrate that I do not assume the conclusion in the premises. I'd make premise 1 that the nature of reality was the same in the recent past as it was in the deeper past, and premise 2 that the near future is to the recent past as the recent past is to the deeper past. Then my conclusion would be that the nature of reality will most likely be the same in the future as it was in the past. This is only circular if either premise is dependent on the idea that tomorrow is like yesterday, which they are not. The first premise is justified by our countless experiments on physics, our most accurate description of reality's nature, which have never indicated any change. Further, my memory is of a reality which never changes. The second premise is justified by the definition, unless you have a problem with how chronology works. Please, Messenger, or any theist watching, explain to me why this is circular. I'm pretty convinced it's not. There's another way to frame it, too. If I were to just look around the world knowing nothing about it and wonder if I might ever float away, the honest answer would be that I don't know. I might float away, or I might keep standing on the ground. It would take some sort of evidence to rule one of these options out. Then I do experiments where I watch celestial objects orbit each other and masses here on Earth attract each other, and I realize that I'm a mass standing on a massive planet. If I wanted to believe that I would go floating off, I would have to do so against the weight of the evidence I have. So it isn't so much that I can prove that I won't go floating off, it's just that I find it extremely unreasonable to expect that I would. There's even one more angle I can take, one which may be the most difficult to refute. If all I am aware of is my own existence, I know nothing else about reality, then I could still infer the uniformity of nature from the idea that without a consistent nature of reality, my very mind would be incoherent. It stems directly from the brute fact. I think, therefore I am, therefore the reality in which I am is self-consistent. I mean, this isn't even look at the trees level difficult. It's just look at yourself.
So the atheist's answer here is that he believes that the future is going to remain uniform. It's going to be similar to the past because in the past, the future was like the past. So the future is like the past because the future is like the past.
I think it's funny that this guy has to play word games and intentionally mix up my position in order to argue against it. To help cut through his bullshit, every time you hear him say this, I want you to think, tomorrow will be like yesterday because tomorrow was like yesterday. It's a one-to-one statement to what Messenger said, and yet blatantly not my claim. My claim would be that tomorrow will probably be like today because today was like yesterday. The nuance Messenger's statement misses is that when he uses the word future, he conflates two different meanings. The first future is referring to the future of the present not yet known. The second future is referring to the future of the past, which to us in the present has become part of the past. It is known. Therefore, you can use the latter to infer something about the former.
Why don't we wake up hoping that we're not going to float into the sky? You know, after all, chance universe. That's how we should be acting if atheism were true.
Messenger thinks this is evidence against atheism because he thinks atheism predicts a random, non-uniform universe. It simply does not. All my atheism says is that we have the universe we have without a God. I don't know how to connect my belief that God doesn't exist to some prediction that the universe should be random or non-uniform. Maybe Messenger would care to explain why he thinks these things are related, but I'm pretty sure he's just doing that thing again where he mixes up his own presuppositions with my worldview. So in the meantime, I'm happy to think that his last and best disproof of atheism once again isn't even relevant. I never claim that I know why the universe is the way it is. I only ever claim to be pretty confident on how it is. Any expectation that one should have access to metaphysics to know why things are the way that they are is, to me, an indicator of a massively overgrown ego which cannot accept the idea of not knowing something. So to summarize, Messenger's information in the DNA argument doesn't hold up because he misunderstands how natural selection acts on entire populations to increase genetic information. Nor does he understand that it only takes one protocell to start the whole chain off. As soon as a chemical system forms which can nearly self-replicate itself without falling apart, at least enough that it's likely to make more than one copy of itself, then chances skyrocket that the system will seed a tree of life. Then his arguments got worse. He quote-mined Darwin to support an incredibly well-debunked idea that eyes or large dinosaurs could possibly exist under evolution. Then he forgot that the system containing Saturn, Comets, and the Sun is not a two-body system, and so orbits aren't eternally stable. Finally, he pretended that I only believe that tomorrow will be like yesterday because I believe that tomorrow will be like yesterday. Messenger, please do yourself a favor and go read a fucking book.